you've got to do what's right for you, and you've got to do what makes you happy. And if you want to be a founder, no one's going to gun to your head. If you want to run your own business, no one's going to gun to your head, right? It's a choice.
All right, man. How are you finding your podcast yourself? Are you enjoying it?
Yeah, love it. I mean, I used to run a podcast back in 2014
I
called
saw.
RealSport. Yeah, which was a lot of
Yeah.
fun. So I missed doing it. And to be honest, I just think I missed how I like, for me, my art is conversation. I'm not
Hmm.
creative. Like for me, my enjoyment comes from having interesting conversations with interesting people. I'm sure you're the same.
Man, it's the exact same. Sure, I remember seeing your post around that you were dyslexic. It was the
Yeah,
same reason why I started my podcast because I'm also dyslexic.
interesting.
So I was gonna do like a blog. Like, well, I was always into like online business when I was younger, and I had
Yeah,
ideas to do so much different shit. And then I said, you know what, I'll do a podcast because I can find a happy medium. Now I ended up writing every single day, and that's what I do now anyway. So
yeah,
it's funny, it goes 180, but like, man, I
yeah.
feel like, as someone extroverted like yourself or someone like myself, it comes very naturally. So it's good to see you back on that horse as well.
Yeah, I've loved it, mate. How long have you been running yours now?
2 years, 120
Wow,
episodes in 2 years.
years. Amazing, amazing. And has it, I mean, how long did it take for it to really get where you wanted it to be? Obviously, that you always wanted to be more, like, don't get me wrong, but
Mhm.
when did you really find it start clicking?
I feel for me, it's when I became comfortable with how I wanted it to grow. So in the
Mhm.
beginning, it's this fucking hedonic treadmill where you want like bigger guests and all this bullshit. But I just set myself up so that I wanted month over month growth. I
Yeah,
wanted my writing to improve, my questions to improve, the conversations to improve. So when I got to about a year mark on that, it went kind of nicely as a result. And you would notice as well, like it becomes more and more leverage. So you're able to
yeah,
do bigger productions. So now, like my podcast has turned into a sizable business. Like I'd call it a small business, and I
yeah,
can rent out huge studios. Like I do big productions now, so I do online ones for people like
amazing.
yourself who's in London. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's a sick medium, man. Like as in the ideas of building SaaS platforms and other products around it. Like it just
Mm,
spits off. Like you're a product dude as well. So when you
yeah.
have those ideas, you can make a lot of it eventually.
100%. Love it, mate. I love the passion that you have when you talk about it as well. It's refreshing to hear. You're definitely not going through the motions with this one, you know?
Man, there's no fucking downtime with this.
Yeah.
In your own context, though, like you're a second time founder now.
Yeah.
Why do you think you do what you do? Like, why is it you do it?
It's a really good question. I mean, my dad was an entrepreneur when I was growing up. Well, he grew up in the East End of Glasgow in very, very
Nice.
different circumstances. He was a taxi driver, a bus driver for many, many years, long distance truck driver. He wasn't someone who came from a background of education, didn't go into the city, so had zero network whatsoever, but saw him try and fail and try and succeed and try and fail many different things.
Hmm.
He finally made money when I was 19. But for many years growing up, especially there was a while when my mum got ill, my dad lost everything. Like we had zero income. So I was very, very aware of the ups and downs of entrepreneurialism and what it meant. But I was
Hmm.
also very, very aware that I wasn't going to be able to go and work for my dad's company. My dad didn't have contacts that he could go and sort me out things. So I had this work ethic from day one that was like, whatever I do, it's going to be off my own back. Like whatever I achieve, like it's going to be off my own back. So I think that work ethic always naturally led me to discovering opportunities. So if it was at uni, for example, start running nights, start running events, start running trips from,
Same, man.
you know what I
I
mean?
was
So
doing the same when I was
that's it.
running fucking like festivals and house party events and paying on the
Exactly.
door and shit. And I was like 19.
Exactly. Yeah, spot on. Exactly that. And I think that's it. Like, if you're wired that way, where it's like, okay, you just work hard, you're always naturally going to grow into opportunities. So I don't think it was ever a conscious decision to go and be an
Mhm.
entrepreneur, but we were running loads of parties in Nottingham. We were running loads and loads of events. We were running trips from Nottingham to Amsterdam. We started taking over 3 or 4 different unis. So we rolled out what it was that we were doing, which was basically just like a events brand, really, from Nottingham. Then we went to Nottingham Trent, and we went to Leeds, and we had like 8 universities that we were running stuff from. And I don't know if you remember, there was a uni publication called the Tab. I don't know if you ever
Mm.
saw those. It's basically like the uni edition of the Sun. like proper shitty clickbait, tabloid, like, you know, 6 things I discovered in holes in my, like, really, really bad. And we were just like,
Oh,
just really, really shit, you know. And to be fair, it was massive. Like, it did really, really well. This was back when Facebook algorithms were really clickbait, very, very, very clickbait heavy. And we just thought, if we could create something, if we could utilize the brand that we had and create something online that would allow students to create content. And back then, every man's dog had a blog and they were writing their own things. We were like, if we can just start aggregating things together, we can start, you know, just getting a lot of traction online. And that started building out really nicely. We rolled out 8 different unis, but then we
fuck.
realized, you know, students don't want to spend money. Brands didn't really want to spend money on students at that time. Very different time. Online monetization isn't what it was. So we just pivoted into sports, and so it all happened super organically.
How did you get into the software side of things? Like, did you have a technical? I don't imagine you have a technical background, or do you?
I don't have a technical background, no. I'm very product focused, but I always had a CTO along the way. So initially,
Mm.
with the first time we ran student sock, as it were, this is what we were building before. We just, you know, used an outsourced development agency, which, you know, goes to show how little I knew what I was doing in terms of
Yeah,
using
of
an outsourced
course.
development agency. And then when we founded RealSport and incorporated that, we brought in a proper CTO.
Nice, nice. To be fair, those agencies are pretty robust though. Like I even know a close friend of mine who's building like a SaaS platform off it, he's a technical guy. Well, he's technical to a degree. And he's able to get an agency and they
Yeah.
handle product design, kind of GTM as well, like pretty much a lot of the software cycles, you know?
Yeah, which is cool. This back in 20, I think things have changed so much. It's back in
Of course.
2013, right? And web development agencies in 2013, half of them were cowboy shops. You know, you really didn't know what you were getting. You worked at the web development agency. They were outsourcing things to places, you know, you would never imagine they were. And it was, you know, you didn't have the same transparency, right? Now with
Yeah.
LinkedIn and everything else, like if I want to be an entrepreneur, there's so much tooling out there. There's so many ways of accelerating my process that weren't available in 2013. So back then it was like chop shop. Like if you wanted to find a development agency, like you didn't know.
Yeah, man. The due diligence as well is just not there at all, you know. So now you have so much like social proof or
Mm,
testimonials, or you know people like like we're
yeah,
connected now. I guarantee you we're going to cross paths in some domain over the course of the next decade. Like, oh, as long as that dude's podcast, it's a small
100%.
world. Whereas back there, the connectivity was just not there, you know.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, well, this is the thing, right? It's you know, back then social media was still more about communicating with friends than I think consuming information, or it was just a
Mhm.
return of that. Whereas now I'd say, you know, social media is purely information driven.
Definitely, man. Even think now I wouldn't even use social media for the purpose of anything outside of professional aspects.
Yeah,
Genuinely, like my Instagram turned from just being like stupid shit to actually business focused stuff now that I put up for my podcast or whatever. So it's like everything shifts. Maybe it's my age as well. Like at 26, the focus is kind of slightly different, maybe, but
yeah.
I don't know, you know.
No,
But
100%.
in terms of like how you've changed, like how you've matured, do you think you matured vastly during the first company you founded compared to now? Because now you're very like stoic and wise, and I read your blogs very closely, and I like to see between like your emotion side of it. But when you're
Yeah.
young, were you just scrappy and just kind of dumb and clueless?
Yeah, for sure, man. I mean, I would still consider myself in that bracket in many, many ways, mate, in many, many ways. But I think, you know, you might have come across him, Dan Bowyer, who's the GP
Mm.
of Superseed, which is a VC in London, and he always says this, and it's, I think as you get a bit older, you fall more in love with doing business than the business. And I think once you know, make that transition to like, I just love building. I just love building businesses. I love understanding how businesses work. I love running teams. I love building cultures rather than, you know, the specifics. I think you can really get past a lot of that emotion and see it a bit more for what it is. So I think you get to that stage. But yeah, you know, I mean, when like Real Sport was a crazy journey. It went so fast, so quickly. We were at 175,000 users within 3 months, which was insane. And it was just so much of it was just luck. And I think that's another big part of it, because I know so much of that success was luck. It really makes me be like, yeah, it went amazingly, but it could have gone so differently. Like, we were really
True.
in the right place.
But you mentioned luck a few times now, but I think you're being modest to a degree, because I feel like I'll give an example. Like Revolut, for instance, 20 million users at this stage. Like, sure, the payment processor in the beginning was luck and it was a great idea and they're right place, right time, and probably funded really well. But the growth that they've got was probably not luck as well to a degree. So I tried to use that as an example for yourself, because like you obviously had like product market fit,
Yeah.
take off, some sort of marketing aspect behind it, you know?
Yeah, no, we did absolutely, and no business would ever gain that level of traction without PMF, and it's obviously so important. But PMF is down to timing, right? That product at a different time. So, for example, with RealSport, what we did was we had a content creation toolkit that helped people create podcasts, videos, other types of content, and then give them tools for social amplification. Now, had we applied that to cooking or to music, maybe it wouldn't have worked. But because we applied it and built it specifically for sports and gaming, this is 2013, 14, just when sports journalism was blowing up in Twitter in a big way. If you remember, World Cup was quite compared to now. World Cup 2014, Germany beat Brazil 7-1, and Twitter fucking blew up, right? It was like the biggest thing on Twitter. And it was just that time when people were like, right, this is the future of getting sports news quickly. This is the future of sports content. And Twitch launched in 2012, I think, 2012. So right just at the time when people were starting to create content for gaming. So if we had applied our tools, if we had applied the way that we were building out our community and that infrastructure to a different sector, it possibly wouldn't have worked. So we did get very, very lucky with that. And we did have failures along the way. We tried to launch Real Food, Real Music, and Real Pets later down the line. None of them landed. None of them landed. But yeah, we got really lucky with RealSport.
That's awesome, man. You mentioned loads of great points I want to dig into, but I think first and foremost is probably the timing, because timing, of course, now is very key. Like, I don't have any like sentiment indicators on hand, but if I was to check one that was across Twitter, you would see VC funding at its lowest in terms of like impression, let's say, just like overall perspective, as well as general like business, especially what I'm in fintech, would probably be the lowest it's been. So how do you think about timing? Like, do you feel like that is there a market for certain goods regardless of timing, because economic timing?
Yeah, I mean it's a really good question. I think there's definitely a demand for some goods all the time, right? Some goods all the time. And we won't bother to going into commodities. Like, these things are just always going to be with us. But I think, and I made a post about this on LinkedIn a few months ago about businesses that went through recessions or that were born during recessions. And I genuinely believe that, I don't know if it's as much about those goods having a need during that time, like Airbnb. Like, do people need Airbnb during a recession? Probably not. Maybe. I mean, yeah, I guess people want to get extra money, but the reasons these businesses grew is actually because people are focusing on fundamentals more. So when we talk about timing now, if you're a business that can prove market demand and efficient allocation of capital to scale revenue over the next year, like that's the way the timing. So I actually think it's less about sector over 2023. It's more about how you orient your business units to be of the flavor of the month, which is sustainable growth, strong business fundamentals. Like, that's the timing bit right now. So if you can build a business which has those fundamentals rather than heavily subsidizing cost of acquisition, just to acquire market share, like you might have with the Q-commerce. I don't know if you saw, Gorillas just got acquired for basically nothing by Get It. So I think the timing now is actually how you orient your business rather than the specific good.
How does that work with, say, users, like user demand on the other side then, for instance? So let's say theoretically we can allocate a business a certain way. This is how we're going to hire, this is how we're going to resource, this is how we're going to do marketing. But then the counterparty, let's say, like how demand changes. So let's just say if it is like this recessionary area that we're in, whether we're in it or not, like the perspective on that cannot influence fundamentals so strongly that it would stray away, like investors or the growth of a business.
Yeah, I mean, 100%, I guess so. If if no one's buying, right, if there's no demand for
Yeah.
it, then you've got to pivot. So you'll die. You will die. The good thing that will come out of this is businesses will be forced to either change what they're doing in terms of the service, the offering, whatever it might
Yeah.
be, to something which does still have that market need, or they will die. I don't think there will be even conversations. So I was recently out in the US for a couple months, and it was really interesting to see how, talking about the investor side of things, VCs are very much dividing investment opportunities into 4 quadrants: high burn, high growth; high burn, low growth; low burn, high growth; low burn, low growth. Right? High burn, low growth. No one's interested. No one's going to fund that. Like, no one's going to fund that. If you're
Could you
in
give
a
an
low,
example of who that would be?
yeah, I guess like Gorillas, right? They couldn't get any more funding, so they were acquired by Get It. But when they're burning that much money and they're not growing in a way that's showing any path to profitability, funders just don't want to know about it. And one of the big things that's influencing this is most VCs raised large funds late 21, early 22, when there was a mega market. And depending on how long their fund cycle is, 3 to 5 years, they don't need to deploy that capital until anywhere between late 24 and late 26, maybe even early 27 if they raise the 5-year fund in early 22. So 2023, people are just sitting on their hands. I think the only businesses that get serious institutional funding are the ones who can show either, clear path to profitability with still, fair burn. But the big winners are going to be, low burn, high growth. Those are going to be the big ones. And if you can do that, you're going to get really, really strong investment going into 2024. But one of the big warning signs I'm giving to every founder I'm speaking to right now is no one's impressed by low burn, low growth. No one's impressed by you just surviving. It's not like, right, we survived 2023, we didn't grow, but we survived, let's get investment. Like, that's not going to work that way. So you've got to take risks still. You've got to go for it to make sure you're growing, because VCs, regardless of what they say, they still want to see the growth journey. They just want to see you achieve it with good spend, like a decent level of spend. So just the last thing you should be doing is going to default alive. I know this is against everything YC said, but don't go to default alive. Figure out a way to grow and do it efficiently, because funders aren't going to come knocking just because you're still alive.
And I think this VC world is very new even to me, I think, to be honest, because like someone who's been interested in this kind of space, or I suppose Revolut's more like high growth kind of a company, or a big company at this stage, it's still a bit of just a small bit of a black hole. So I think that's really interesting. You're saying the low burn, high growth aspect. How do you like position yourself towards a VC in that aspect? Like, let's say, which fundamentals are you focusing on? Like, what metrics are you focusing on? And a good way to put it is like, would you have an array of business ideas, or if someone's looking to build a startup, how do you execute on a certain idea? Because like, how do you profile what we should tackle? Let's say, does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Yeah, of course. I mean, look, I think, if we're talking about a SaaS business, obviously your fundamentals are going to be your cost of acquisition versus your lifetime value, right? If you can demonstrate that you've got a good CAC to LTV ratio, and then you've got a good payback period. So, for example, I see a lot of people moving to annual contracts rather than monthly contracts. That way they're getting immediate payback, shows much better unit economics, for example, reduces any risk of that specific sale becoming unprofitable. So those are sort of the key metrics that you're looking at there, really across the board, anything digital. I can't really speak on behalf of like retail or those sorts of sectors. But I think bake in revenue from day one. What we're seeing now, and what I'm seeing is, how free users, especially in a down economy, especially when things are tough, how free users engage with the product in terms of net promoter score, in terms of their levels of engagement, in terms of their levels of tolerance. How they act as a free user is no indication of how they're going to act as a paid user in these markets.
Ooh, that's interesting.
Yes, you've got to monetize from day one. This is my view. Everyone's got different views. This is my view. You've got to monetize from day one and understand how to grow your paying user base, and what your paying user base is going to stick around for. Because free users are not necessarily a good indication, and no one cares about free users right now. Like, if anything, and I think this is a good thing, if anything, like this shake in the economy that we're going to be experiencing for a while is going to say, right, who can actually monetize in their space? Back to real business in that sense.
Yeah. And that's why sometimes I always joke at this stuff, because like raising on hopium with fuck all fundamentals of how you're going to make money over the long run is like, it's a bit wild, isn't it? So that's why Did you bootstrapped your first startup, or am I wrong in saying that?
Um, I mean, we bootstrapped it for a little bit. So we literally paid this web agency the first time 800 quid, which we managed to scrape
Sick.
together from doing whatever. Um, with RealSport, it took us like a year to raise, I think we raised like 50K family and friends, which saw us through the first year. Like we did it so bootstrapped, like 50K for a year runway was insane. We paid ourselves nothing. We were literally pitching like our friends from uni to do internships with us rather than doing grad schemes. Like once we finished, which was really good of them, to be fair, and obviously rewarded them along the way in terms of like giving them shares and everything. So we were just doing everything we could, and then we finally raised about a year after we launched RealSport. But by that time, our numbers were really, really good. But the thing is, like, I knew nothing about raising money when I started that business. I knew nothing about raising money when starting that business. So I didn't know to go to investors. I didn't know to go. We could have raised earlier because we had such good traction, but we didn't know where to go to find them. We just
Yeah.
didn't have people invest. It was only because my co-founder's brother had raised investment around that time for his own thing that world opened up to me. Like I didn't even know you could raise money in that way, like angel investors. Like I didn't know that was a thing. So we definitely bootstrapped it longer than we had to, but that was probably the right thing for the business. And then with Connectd, I self-funded for the first 6 months until we started raising capital. So self-funded it through to building the MVP to about 20K MRR, maybe 15K MRR, and then we raised funding for it.
15K. Yeah. Again, that's not even, I suppose, once you have your financial model set up, like that's a pretty reasonable target to get to be able to
Yeah,
do it,
100%.
Seems
And
really.
obviously, because of the exit of RealSport, I think it's a bit different that people expect you to put in money as
Mhm.
your own money as an exited founder, which makes total sense, rather
Yeah.
than as a first-time founder who probably has no cash.
Makes sense. Bit more skin in the game. So you've also gone on to become like an angel investor yourself and to, sit on the board of many different founders and whatnot, or
Yeah.
many different startups. What would you say are like some of the fundamentals of great founders that you look for and that you want to work with?
Yeah, so it's really interesting. So when I was a founder, I was always very, very good at investor reporting because I was very, very grateful. Like anyone who gave me money, I was so grateful, like just, so thankful that they support the vision. So I was keeping them in the loop the whole way, keep like taking them on the journey with me the entire time so that if we ever needed to raise money again, we went to sell the company, like everyone was aligned, like we were all in it together, which was great. And then when I started investing in other founders, I realized, oh, not everyone is actually as good at keeping people in the loop. And there's no better teacher than writing 50, 60K check and not hearing from that person for 7 months until something's gone terribly wrong or they need something else. So I was like, okay, this is interesting. So anecdotally, and I really want to fund some research into this to really like get some quantitative analysis around this. Every angel investor I speak to, hands down, the biggest indicator of success of a company is how much founders keep their investors in the loop, because that shows that they're transparent. It shows that they're always thinking about growth. They're always thinking about their core metrics. They're always thinking about, moving the business forward, like just in the way that you said about the podcast, like month on month growth. So people who are looking in their business that way rather than like, yeah, we're gonna do all these big things, and I mean, you need that as well, but you've got to have two, right? You've got to have the yin and yang of vision, but month to month execution. So I'd say the best founders are the ones who are on it with their business. And that's why I think as well, like, obviously, if you're in a deep tech environment, an amazing founder is going to have some incredible domain expertise, very, very high moat around it. But when we're talking about typical SaaS plays, and we're talking about maybe, businesses which don't have that type of edge, it's all about how that founder views their business, how the way they want to be transparent, the way they want to be humble about it, and that's why I don't, for me, I've invested in lots of founders who don't come from Oxford, Cambridge, don't come from those traditional backgrounds which seem to get all the funding, because actually a lot of them don't, I don't know, a lot of them don't necessarily have the hustle or the focus on
Completely
building
agree,
it.
man.
Do you know what
Man,
I mean?
I saw something the other day being like the world is fucking run with C students.
Yeah,
So true, man.
100%,
It's just
100%,
it's
totally
it's a bunch
is.
of bunch of dummies like me and you, man, who
Yeah,
like scrape their way through our exams.
100%, 100%, exactly that. And I mean, and one of the things is, and I will say, like, a lot of my investors, like, who did come from that traditional background, they're amazing because they're great investors and they invest in people like me and you. And that's great because they do go down more traditional routes. So it all works really, really nicely. But for sure, for me, I would take someone with hustle and grit and determination who,
Mm-hmm.
it's quite a controversial topic at the moment. It's quite a controversial topic at the moment. But I think, having a baked in safety net where it's like, it doesn't matter if it fails or not from a personal finance perspective, like, you're always going to be hungrier if you need this to work. Now, that's not to say anyone should be on a breadline, it's not to say anything like that, but just in terms of my observation, like, there are people that I meet who it's like, yeah, this guy's going to succeed because he's just banging down every fucking door and he won't stop, and it's just that hustle, that determination that's always going to be the winner.
And man, I sometimes I get odd to this because like I have my own agency as well, which works on like podcast production, and like it's a cash flow business, so
Mm.
it's at odds to a startup, and that's why sometimes
Mhm.
I get kind of caught in my brain because I'm thinking like for a startup, generally if you raise, like you do need cash, and like coming from being a fucking brokey, that's not what you have an excess of course. Whereas
Yep.
an agency, like you can get up to like 3 or 4 or 5 thousand a month pretty quickly if you have a decent
Yeah.
business model. So that's why sometimes it's a bit interesting, but that's why I'm always kind of odds to that. And what you're saying about like, the grind and the hustle, David Goggins was just talking on Joe Rogan about that, about they're talking about elite athletes, like
Yes.
fighters. So even the best, so naturally great fighters, great like technically faster, fitter. They're usually the hardest to coach because they either
Yeah.
have a chip on their shoulder or
Yeah.
they were very successful when they were younger. But it's usually the other guys who aren't much, they're just grinders. They're the
Yeah.
best people to be on. And then,
Mate.
the example they used was Khabib,
100%.
who wasn't great when he was younger. Well, he was obviously
Mhm.
great, but he wasn't the best. And now he's
Yeah.
retired, undefeated.
Yeah. I mean, that said, anyone who's fighting bears as a kid, I'm like, you probably got something in you, right?
Got
But
that
you're
drive.
100% right. I just had Mike Brown on my podcast, who was, won Six Nations twice with England, was tournament of a player of the tournament, and he was telling me, he didn't join a rugby playing school until he was 16. He hadn't played rugby till he was 16, so he literally was starting so far behind everyone, had to catch up and then exceed everyone to get the Harlequins contract and then get into England. And it's the same like, Michael Jordan, classic story from The Last Dance, didn't make his high school basketball team, right? It's no, and literally I asked Mike, like, what does it take to be successful? Work ethic. That's what it comes down to. And he was like, I saw people who were far more naturally gifted than me, far more ability than me, just fall by the wayside because they didn't want to do that work. And like the reason he was at the top for 19 years and at that level for 19 years is because of the work ethic. Like, it's not a secret. Do you know what I mean? Like, this is the
100%.
thing. Like, this is like everyone's just got to listen to this, which is work hard and good things will come.
And it's someone said it to me recently as well. I'm not too sure. Do you know Dan Coe? He's like a big online creator, like really, really wise, like stoic guy. The term is called tactical stress he uses. So
Interesting.
what you do is fuck yourself into a scenario whereby, it's the heaven and hell analogy, and
Okay.
of, this is where we can potentially go to, but this is what, if things don't work out, what will happen to you. So it lights the spark under your ass essentially. So you get
Yeah,
up and
that's
keep
cool.
moving forward. So that's why, like, let's say being in London, because the investors are there and the customers are there, but you're also burning through cash, so you need
Yeah,
to work harder on it. And man, I'm about that lifestyle, like 100%. Like I do believe in the world of like hard work and what comes back from it. Like
yeah,
absolutely not a snowflake in any slight exaggeration, or living through this kind of online world of, oh, it's all gonna be rosy. Like that's what
yeah,
I love about your work, man, because and that's what I love to get into as well. Like the mental side of what you've done has been
yeah,
crazy. It's been wild, man.
yeah.
It's been really wild.
And this is the thing. Like, I think there's a lot to be said about this. Like, I know you're such a hard worker as well, so this will ring true to you, which is, you know, of course, it's the fundamentals of everything. I think mental health is a really, really interesting one. Like, mental health is a very, very interesting one because for me, mental health is incredibly important. I've invested heavily into mental health technology. One of the first big
Awesome.
checks I wrote was into a mental health technology company, something that's impacted my family, something that's impacted most people's families, if not themselves. You know, everyone knows. So I think mental health is incredibly important and it can't be ignored. But what I do think is you've got to do what's right for you and you've got to do what makes you happy. And if you want to be a founder, no one's got a gun to your head. If you want to run your own business, no one's got a gun to your head, right? It's a choice. So I think it's very, very difficult to say, oh, sorry, I got ringing in the background.
You're right.
Apologies
Don't worry, man.
if
It's chill.
you can hear or not. Um, you know, no one's got a gun to your head to be a founder. No one's got a gun to your head to be a business owner. So I think if you're going to take that on, and if you're going to take other people's money, if you're going to employ people and be responsible for them, you know, that's a choice that you've made to go down that path. And therefore, like hard work are the building blocks there. If you want to have the rosy life and you want to have everything else, you can choose that, right? It's all a choice. Like you can have that, but you can't have everything, right? You can't have your cake and eat it. If you want to commit to this lifestyle, commit to this mindset, realize what it is. But if it's not going to make you happy, don't do it. Do you know what I mean? If it's going to make you unhappy, choose the other path. You could move to a beach tomorrow. You could move to Singapore, right? You weren't happy in the UK. You didn't like the weather. You chose. People have got total free will to choose whatever makes them happy. And you can move to a beach to Thailand tomorrow and fuck off any sort of responsibility and just do that. And you should do that if that makes you happy. But if you want to play entrepreneur, realize what the rules of the game are.
Completely agree, man. And like, why do you say you do it so like through the challenges, through all the mental health issues that you've had? Because to your point, I've also done the beach life. Like I've lived on the beach before for a long time, and I tell you, man, like beaches get fucking boring. There's no two ways about that.
Yeah, well, that's it, right? It's I've got ADHD, so for me, balance feels like moving as quickly as forward as I can. So yeah, I would get bored, but I love it. Like I'm yes, I've had the mental health challenges, but I don't. The mental health challenges for me have been nothing to do with work, nothing to do with work stress. This is what I want to do. I think mental health is a very, very interesting, very, very interesting concept. Who knows what leads? It can be triggered by so many different things. It can be triggered by trauma, it can be triggered by emotional relationships, it can be triggered by environment. There are so many different things that can trigger mental health spirals, conditions, thoughts, stress, anxiety, depression. For me, none of them are to do with work. I love work. Work is my solace. Like work is where I want to be. That's what makes me happy. We got a Christmas party today. We have I think there's like 35 of us in the UK now. We've got 15 in Warsaw, Krakow. We've got 5 in Mumbai, and like seeing the culture we've built, like that's my happiness. So that's what I do. Like I just love building.
Work is play to you.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. It's not to say I don't love. There's not parts which aren't stressful,
Man.
but I think when you can see things from ahead, and I think this is where we're probably cut from the same cloth, because you've done the beach thing, right? Because I think, and you've moved to Singapore and you've done these things, you realize that you can actually have a bit of a helicopter view and be like, I'm choosing to do this. Like, this is the narrative I'm choosing right now. Like, I could be this guy, I could be this guy, I could be beach guy, I could be gym guy, I could be podcast guy, I could do all these things. And when you realize you have options and you realize you have choices that you can make, and although some of them are going to be more difficult and everything else, you can ride that storm a little bit better because it's like, well, I'm choosing this. Like, this is what I'm doing right now. But, entrepreneurialism, building, having fun, these are all lifelong journeys. You're 26?
26. Man, I feel like I need to keep on moving as fast as possible though. Like honestly, like because why I again you say cut from the same cloth. Why I think we're very similar is because when I read your post about holidays, I haven't taken a day off in 2 years. And now that doesn't mean I work 10 hours a day. It just
Yep.
means that every day I slightly move the needle. Some days more, some days slightly less. But I don't do it because it's a struggle, it's the grind. I just enjoy it. Some of it could be writing posts, man. I could be writing an hour of posts one day, just building things out. I could be practicing on things, but I just enjoy those kind of nuances from it. And I think I remember seeing something recently as well. It was like, entrepreneurships or startups is like a journey of self-discovery disguised in a quest for profitability. That's pretty much what it is. So when we see people who go on, like let's say ultra marathon runners or whatever, we see that they're genuinely doing something that is in that pursuit. But same in this aspect, you take the risk, man. You take the responsibility, and I feel like that. I couldn't drop you into fucking Monzo as head of product. I just couldn't
Yeah.
see it.
Yeah,
you
yeah,
know.
yeah, exactly that. But that's me. I love that. I hadn't heard that before. It's very, very interesting, and definitely like building RealSport the first time. Like I saw parts of the leader I didn't want to be. I saw parts of things I didn't want to be, and especially at that age, it's like you're 26, man. I'm just so jealous that you're 26. Great, great, great age to be. But I actually think one of the things that is crazy, and when I compare myself to like my dad, or even I see the gap between me and you, I'm 31. The amount of pressure people are putting themselves at a younger and younger age is pretty crazy. I mean, it's leading to some amazing things, some amazing output. But it's a very interesting trend. Like my dad was driving buses when he was 30 and didn't think twice about it, and didn't feel that pressure. Now, maybe that's just my dad. Maybe other people did feel that. I don't know. But yeah, it is amazing the amount of pressure we put ourselves on at a young age now.
It's all about environment design as far as I know. So from like my podcast has always been on. It's all been about living a richer and more fulfilling career.
Mm,
It started off as a career as an online business podcast, and by interviewing like people like yourself in this domain or in different aspects, I realized like who I could be, and I realized who I was, and I was always running from who I previously was and wanted to run towards this new model. And then I really took like a proper view of my own life, and so did many other people. And I kind of always thought like this, like from this conversation, like, you know, you were doing things that were largely different than other people in your 20s,
mm,
which has led you down this successful path. And, I
mm.
would consider you to be very, very successful. Therefore, if I conform and do the same as everybody else, I will yield those same results, which will be things that will not make me satisfied, fulfilled,
Yeah,
filled with anything. So I just think super deeply about this stuff, and then I just try to
yeah,
take lots of action in between. So between
yeah.
us chatting, I just try to like act on ideas, just see what I can do, execute ideas.
Yeah, for
And
sure. You're doing it such a smart way. You're doing it such a smart
mm,
way because you have got a really, really strong business on like the agency side, which you can actually make, which you're building a safety net, which is great. And I think if there's anything that I would have done differently, I would have actually done more of what you're doing to give myself a base. Because the way that I was so high risk, like when we sold RealSport, I had personal debt. I was in personal debt. The swing of like, right, I'm gonna be a self-made multimillionaire at 26 or be broke and in debt. Like the swing of that was so crazy that I wish I had done. Now, if I was starting again, I'd be doing exactly what you're doing, which is starting either like a studio or an agency or something like that, building up the book, identifying problems, identifying, opportunities, and then building something off the back of that and be like, right,
mm,
I found this common denominator. This is what everyone I'm speaking to is either struggling with. This is everyone who I'm producing their podcast. This is what they're struggling with. Right. Here's a product opportunity that comes from that. But I've built a book of revenue along the way. Like that's the way to do it. That's how I would do it now.
mm.
That the risk that I took was just stupid. Like it was all or nothing.
We all fuck up those things though. And what you were describing there, Andrew Gazecki explained really, really well as well. It's like, make your money off an agency, then build a product around it, but mine's not all fucking hail and glory though. Like I was way too heavily like exposed to crypto, to stocks and shit. Like I'll give you an example. Like if I wasn't as exposed, Jesus
Yeah.
Christ, man, I'd have enough cash to sit on 2 years to try to figure out a problem, like genuinely,
Yeah.
like stress free. But Jesus Christ, like I think everybody under non was too over leveraged on crypto for the last couple of years,
Yeah.
So
Sure.
that's why even for me, like I think like constant odds, but it's all just learning experiences. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
because for me, like no kids, whatever, like it's fucking grand. Like even anything that I do, like it's grand. Like I'll figure it out. I don't want to be throwing away cash, but at the end of the day,
Yeah.
like it's all right.
It's
And
really
to be
sick.
honest, everything is so cheap, man. For instance, like
Yeah.
hosting platforms,
Yeah.
AWS, any sort of like keys. I'll give you an example. So you're dyslexic as well. I got today Pro Writing Aid, the
Hmm.
tool. It's like a
Hmm.
helpful tool, whatever. It was like $100 for the month, for the year, and I was just like, oh fuck it, I'll just get it. I was like, I'll get it, I'll use it. Whereas like before, you would need a copywriter to check
Yeah,
your
yeah.
stuff, and pay them. Whereas I just paid some software $80, fixed all my copy, and I love to write, even though I'm dyslexic.
Mm,
So I'm like really, really trying to get better at it. And I was like, oh fuck, I'll just get this. It was
yeah,
$80 for the year.
yeah.
Does that make sense? Different time than you,
100%. This is the beauty of where we are in the world right now. Is look, there's a lot of doom and gloom. There is a lot of doom and gloom, and you know, there's a lot of people like struggling right now, which is tough. But the tools we have to accelerate our process, like, if you build enough data, like, you don't need to build your own machine learning. You get it off the shelf from Amazon. Like, we're at a stage where you get machine learning off the shelf. Like, we can get AI off the shelf. Like, we are at a stage now where opportunities are so open to people like us to go and make things happen. But I think it's it's going to be a huge challenge for a lot of corporates. So I gave a talk on Tuesday at this big property company, giving a talk on neurodiversity. And it was just so interesting to see how like corporates think about those conversations, like, should people be allowed to wear headphones in the office? Like, that it's that far behind in some of these environments that when Gen Z and people our age are like, hold on, I can do things myself, I can make my own money, I can do these things, like, corporates are going to struggle. And we already see labor shortage now, where like kids, I know people who own restaurants, I know people who own bars, they can't pay kids enough to dishwash anymore. They can't pay kids enough to do these things because all this tooling is available online for people to monetize their time, make money online. So I think unless businesses wake up to this and realize, right, we're going to have to go all in on culture, all in on purpose, all in on giving people a why to get out of bed, people are going to do what me and you do, which is do our own thing.
100%. I feel like we're speaking from the same fucking brain. I was literally just talking to someone the other day about that, in terms of they were saying like wage spiral and companies can't hire or retain. And I was like, why would you? I was like, if you're anyway creative, the internet has way more rewards to you than most companies. And if people are like, back in the day, they're like, but you could be a managing director in like 15 years. I know a 24-year-old, I was on a podcast last week, that's literally making like 15,000 a month, right? As a ghostwriter on Twitter for people like you. He'd take your account, he'd blow the shit out of it. You can send him a few voice notes of what you want to write. 24 years old. The guy was a psychology student, really smart, could have got into a lot of different companies. He just said, fuck that, I'm just going to work on Twitter. And in my head, I was like, that's the opportunity on the end. It's kind of like when you go traveling, right? When you're in the US, you're like, that's what it's about. That's what's there, So back in the day, you didn't even have access to internet. You didn't know what Singapore or the US was like. Whereas now you're like, whoa, Jesus, this is pretty all right, isn't it? And it's not easy now. It's not easy. Like, this is fucking tough game, a lot involved with it. But it's like, I can live to the point richer and more fulfilling career. And rich, I use the word richer for two aspects, because richer is obviously in life sense and also on the financial side, which as a young professional, I often state that, like, because I came from a very, very like ordinary family, didn't struggle for money, but ordinary. So you would be a fool to not try to maximize how much money you can make. That's the way I determine it, because why not? Why would you not try to do that? You're not working for a charity, so why would you not try to do it?
Yeah, totally that. And I think one of the things that I'm proudest of is that we have 96% retention rate at Connectd.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so 2 people in our entire history have handed their notice. One went to Warner Brothers, one went to Amazon, both for like big salaries that we couldn't match. Both asked for their jobs back within 3 months, because we have built a culture where because I'm so aware, it's like, if I wouldn't want to work for this company, like, I shouldn't expect anyone else to. So like, everyone's got the opportunities to earn, everyone's got opportunities to learn, to develop, to grow, to make big decisions, to have real impact. Because otherwise, people are just going to do what me and you do. And we've got a young average age. We're like, I think I want to say the average age of Connectd is like 27, 28. So it's all people who know what else is out there. So it's like, if we didn't create that culture, I wouldn't expect anyone to stay.
And man, I think even the word culture is very interesting, because I'll tell you something that I've probably never told anyone before. So I was working for a company called Newarka. I'll tell you a story. So I did my internship in London, got the taste for, I guess, what happened was, I moved to London from internship. I realized that a lot of people who weren't really intelligent making a lot of money. That was my conclusion. So I just said, if they can do it, I can definitely do it. I wasn't going to go back to uni, but my parents were like, you have to do it. So I did it. But when I went back, I said I'd work full time. So I worked for a company called Nuerca, which were a fintech that were selling a accounting software into the US. So I
Mhm.
worked full time, 9 to 5 at the startup in this small office in where I'm from in Cork in the south of
Yeah.
Ireland. And I'd go to college. I'd do my studies in the evening. So it was horrific. I was working like 20 hours a day, but it was chill.
Wow.
But I loved the place and I loved the managing director. His name was Paul Leahy. Great culture. Everyone was like, it was like 8 people into her company. And it was so great. But I
Yeah.
left because I was sold the dream of big corporations from Accenture. Okay. It wasn't them
Interesting.
directly, but it was the graduate program scheme and everybody was doing it. And I just fell into the trap. It was a massive mistake.
Yeah.
To your point about the guys that wanted to come back to Connected, I was in the exact same scenario. But 3 months later, I was up in Dublin and I was miserable. Like, I wouldn't say I was depressed, but I definitely had a depressed kind of like emotion from time to
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
So at that point, it made me really think about like what does it mean to be in a company that's has a good culture, whatever. And it's probably people that are around my age, similar interests like this,
Mhm. Mhm.
And yeah, it was something that I always regret. And man, it's
Yeah.
been years. It's been like 3 years since now, and I always think back on it.
Yeah,
Weird.
but you know what? Like, so thankful that you had those few months at that place, right? Because otherwise, I see people who spend 10 years at Accenture and realize that. Do you know what I mean? So, like, knowing what you were missing has led to where you are right now, right? So,
Mhm.
otherwise, like, it's better to see the other side because that's it. Like, so when the student thing, which we were running, fell down before we moved over to RealSport, I considered doing the grad scheme thing. I went for one assessment center at a management consultancy, realized it was not for me, within 10 minutes of being in the assessment center. But, had it been a different day, such energy, had I like had a really good conversation with one person, like who knows? Like life is full of these sliding door moments, right?
100%, man. I I'm even laughing thinking about back in there. I should have known, right? When I did the assessment center and I put on a fucking VR headset, that's when
Yeah.
I should have known.
So that's exactly right. When they were like, when there was one exercise, which is like, right, you need to build a tower of
Yes.
spaghetti and jelly beans. I was like, I'm out. So I'm done. It's like, okay. Do you know why? Because it's the same tactics that army use when they tell you to make your bed when it's already made. It's genuinely psychologically the same thing. You know your bed is made, but you do it again because you're told. I'm sorry, but no one has ever in a management consultancy environment needed to build a tower out of spaghetti and fucking jelly beans, right? So it's the same mentality of like, right, they want conformity. They want people who are just going to do it because they're told to do it and get on with it and not question why they're doing it. So as soon as I saw that, I was like, this is not for me.
Yeah, man. And last thing I'd say on this as well is like when you're in those companies, like I remember I worked my balls off and I thought like, okay, you get promoted, whatever. But it's same salary, same pace as everyone else. And I was like, okay, so I do more work than anyone else and get the same
Mm.
result as anyone else. I'm not incentivized to work harder. Like that's 101 how to incentivize someone. You just all was at the same level. It's wild. I could keep on going all day, but
It's
I want to
insane.
move on.
Yeah. 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 Sure.
So from your perspective though, like how do you create a good culture?
I think you need to destroy ego at every level. Like destroy ego. At every level. We had to make some very difficult decisions early on in Connected, where we had to make certain difficult decisions in order to maintain the culture. Things that showed the entire team that it didn't matter who you were in the organization, but that if you weren't willing to go by values, if you weren't willing to be egoless, if you weren't willing to respect everyone, doesn't matter who you are, you're going to go. So it's practicing what you preach, but the first thing is just removing ego. Like every single person connected has shares, every single person, because like for me, it doesn't sit to be like, come on, guys, like late nights, early starts, let's do this, blah, 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 but I'm the only one on the upside, right? So you've got to just have like genuine equity. You've just got to be genuine because this is the thing, like, and it's all about people. People used to say that to me, and I used to think that was just some cheesy thing. Like it's all about people. Like,
Mm.
what does that mean? Like I used to hear like exit interviews from some CEO of a big company, and they'd be like, it's all about the people. And I just thought that was something people said. I didn't really know what they meant by it, but now I know it's all about the people for two main reasons. One, because the best plans are nothing without the people to execute them. And for people to execute them, they need to be happy. And for people to be happy, you need a good culture and everything else. So it literally is all about the people in that sense. But the other thing is, like, because there is so much luck, money comes, money goes. I know incredibly successful people who then get sued. I know incredibly successful people who lose their money or they lose it on crypto. Like, money comes, money goes. Like, it's all about interactions with people, and it's all about, what you learn. Like, for me, and this is going to sound a bit crazy, but for me, the only way to change the world is genuinely the way that we treat people on a micro interaction basis. It's very, very difficult to change the world on a macro level. Institutions are very entrenched in the way. There's lots of powerful people who control the way that things are, and that is just the reality of it. So the way that we can change the world is the way that we treat other people. Like, the best example I give is, if I see someone shouting at someone who works on TfL, if I see someone who's shouting, working someone on the tube, how that person goes home and speaks to their husband or wife, or is off with their kids that night, or ignores their kids because they've been shouted at work, like, how much does that impact how those kids grow up? How much does that impact their relationship? Versus being nice to people, treating them well, treating them with respect, treating them with dignity, treating them that way, how they go home, treat their families. Like, that's how we actually change the world, is through the way that we interact with people. So for me, like, we've tried to embed that in our culture, is, celebrate everyone, celebrate each other's success, lift people up, help them grow. But you've got to genuinely want that. You can't, it's people will see through it if it's not real. So it's hard to explain how we've built it, but I think it's just, being genuine that that's what we want, and making tough decisions when there are people who don't fall in line with that. I've had to I'll talk about RealSport. We had an incredibly talented person, a really, really talented person, but their attitude just brought other people down. And they were probably our most talented person from a natural ability perspective and what they were doing. And we had to let them go because it was just like, this isn't the culture we want. So making those tough decisions really reinforce it.
That is wild, man. That's wild, because it's like you've got the buy-in from your 25 or 30 employees, which is great. I know people will have slightly different levels of
Yeah.
engagement and it will go through time, but
Well,
the feedback loop that's natural
yeah.
is so unique, and it's very difficult to see. Like, as in, we all see the banners online of like what a company says that they're doing, or their perspective, or their employee retention, all this stuff. A lot of it's trash, man. A
Yeah.
lot of it is trash. For bigger companies, smaller companies, they lose a touch and feel. That's
Mm,
awesome that you're able to cultivate, I suppose, that. And I suppose giving them equity has that point,
yeah.
that perspective. Now, of course, some other companies kind of abuse that and think that they're bought in, but the companies are so big. But I feel like that the way you've done it is like these people are genuinely on the same mission.
Yeah, I mean,
Um,
people love it, and look, so we've got 30 in London, we've got 15 in Poland, and five-ish in more, so around 50. And from what I understand, I've never taken a company past 200 people, so I can't comment on that. RealSport, we were probably like 140 globally, but in terms of all the like managers we had and all the community managers and everything, so I can't comment, and maybe it's easy for me to throw stones in glass houses when we're here at 50 people, but I know that you can do it at 140, and I'm excited for the challenge. If we ever decide to go past 200 people, I'm excited for that challenge, but that's not going to be my main focus when we get to that stage.
of course, man. And I don't know. I think you have been there, you've done it, so it's not like this is all like woo woo to you. You know what I mean? Like, you're
Yeah,
very much
yeah,
coming from a position of expertise. I wanted to chat before we kind of finish up as well, just around the co-founder stuff, because it was our
yes.
latest newsletter. We could go through every one of your newsletters, but we'd need 4 hours. So the co-founder thing is super super interesting, right? Because in an agency sense, anyway, a big thing about co-founder relationships is people that are just lonely. So
Mm,
you don't need it, because let's say we have a marketing agency. Sure, like, you figure it out, and if you need someone, you hire someone. You bring
yeah,
them on a contract based, and then full time. But they often say that like co-founder relationships are genuine. Just you dilute your ownership, and you're just lonely. So either get a
yeah.
girlfriend, get a friend, or get an advisor. That's generally the approach. But then
Nice.
on a technical side, of course, in a startup sense, like, fuck me, like, there's so much nuances to it, that
Yeah,
how you could do it on your own, especially first time round, seems almost,
I
I wouldn't
agree.
say, I'm never going to say the word impossible, but very challenging for sure.
Yeah,
Even from
yeah,
an investor perspective, like I think if I walked in, right, to a room, like people could be like prick, 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 and then just, I'm gone. But when there's two people, there might be some sort of, there's another sphere to it. I don't know. It has another like embodiment in itself. So
yeah.
what's your thoughts on that? Like, would you advise younger people to kind of take that approach, or what do you think?
I I totally agree with you. I totally agree. I think it must be so, if you're a first time founder doing it solo, tough. I mean, not if it doesn't go anywhere, right? At the like two, if it's like there's a lot of founders who like never raise cash, who never like, and then they're on that side of things, and that is what it is. But like when you start getting to the stage where it's like you're employing people, even like three, four people, you've raised a bit of money, like you're going into like negotiations where it's your first time ever in these types of negotiations, and you have no one to really be your sounding board. Like I couldn't have done it. RealSport, there was lots of things that we got wrong in that co-founder relationship, in the sense that we were both working on the same things. We were both commercially focused. My co-founder wasn't technical. We had a CTO, but he wasn't a co-founder. We were co-CEO working on the same things. It didn't make sense, but still, that was actually better than probably being a solo founder at that time. I think this time around is very, very different, and especially having been an investor, like you have a lot more experience. But yeah, I mean, get a co-founder if it's your first time, but you can't bring them in after the fact. They've got to actually be a co-founder, right? It's not like a Rose by any other name, right? It's like they actually need to be a co-founder. Like they need to bleed with you at the start. Like they need to be in that pain with you at the start. They need to be there from day one, because otherwise I think 90% of the time I see it leads to resentment. If you've got two co-founders who are on different levels of equity, it doesn't work, because when you're going into those negotiations, you have a different position. You have a different starting position. You're not aligned. That could be an amazing deal for me, but a shit deal for my co-founder. So you're not aligned. So you've got to have total equity. Otherwise, it doesn't work. It's like a relationship, right, where one person's codependent, the other's not. Like, it doesn't work. Like you've got to have a strong relationship there. But it's tough. It's tough. It's not easy to do.
Wild, man, wild. I think it's so difficult to land that co-founder relationship because of the maybe industry. Like, let's say, for instance, like I'm just trying to say like success stories as a result. So like Revolut, for instance, Nick and Vlad, one was a derivative trader, one was a trading engineer. So Vlad, I think, was an engineer on the trading desk. So they're both probably just like at the time, like, finances like old, dry. Let's make up a solution.
Yeah.
But that seems like a super edge case, which is why it's the size that it is
Yeah.
today. So I often find that people do try to come together, but in different domains, for instance. So even if it is technical, like, I'll give you a good example. If you were an engineer and I came to you being like, we have this awesome idea for a podcast product, we're going to build a new platform, it's going to be great. You'd be like, what the fuck is a platform? And I'm thinking then like, oh, but like there's all these feeds and it's super interesting and things like this.
Yeah.
So there's like an at odds with it.
Yes.
And
totally.
I couldn't. It's difficult to see that pairing. Maybe you work in a company beforehand together. Like, how do you find that relationship? What last question I'll probably ask you.
Yeah, I think so. I think definitely you need exposure to that person before entering that sort of agreement. Now, there are interesting situations where I do see it working, and I was at a really interesting event last night where there was two co-founders. One incredibly academic. He'd built some amazing biotech, which is basically developing a cure for muscular dystrophy, like incredible stuff. But the guy like couldn't raise money, couldn't do a contract. So in situations like that, it's like, because they're almost working as two separate entities. One guy's in the lab 24/7. The other guy's just doing commercial. Sometimes it's easier that way, and those ones I think you can be a little bit less organic, where it's so divided. But otherwise, they've got to come together organically. I really think they do. It's just too much of a risk. It's too much of a risk to just be like, yeah, like let's just do something out of nowhere. So I think that's really helpful. But you also, even with that in mind, build in levers provisions, build in a good shareholders agreement. You need a shareholders agreement, not day one, but like, within the first couple of months, even before you raise funding, so that it's all very, very clear how it works. And, that will help you as well, because you realize, okay, actually, if we fall out, if we can't mediate this ourselves, like the company's going to be over. Whereas if you don't have it out on paper and you haven't actually considered that, it's easier to be a bit more emotional, a bit more hot-headed. So, you need to really, really just lay it all out in contracts. And that way you're like, okay, we're being grown up about this,
Yeah, like much more professional. Yeah, because
Yeah.
I'm just thinking, if you've ever heard of a company called Work Vivo, they're actually based in Ireland. They're employee engagement
Okay.
app. It's sick. A really, really, really good platform
Have
based
a
out of
look at
Cork.
it.
So
Yeah.
it's like a internal Slack, but it's a Facebook for internal. So again, it's
Interesting.
culture,
Okay.
community, something interesting maybe for Connected. But the
Yeah.
two guys are
Definitely.
from Cork, and the technical guy Joe and the other guy John, who John is very like sales and marketing focused. They were in like Silicon Valley, doing like a whatever it is, like in the weeds, like workshop. The guy Joe built the entire platform start to finish, and the founder from Zoom, I forget his name, he was investing in the company. So he was the
Wow.
first investor, and he was
Awesome.
like, I'll only come back to you if I'll only like invest if you make these changes on the plane from San Francisco to Ireland. Joe made all the changes. He built all the changes. They had got to Shannon Airport, middle of fucking nowhere in Ireland, rang the dude from Zoom and was like, "Yeah, we're ready." And so basically, it was the technical dude that built it, and then the guy in
Yeah.
the front, then the sales and marketing dude. So lots to it, man. Lots to it,
Lots to it, mate. Lots to it.
Appreciate it, man. So before we wrap up, where can people find your shit, all your newsletter, all that kind of stuff?
So yeah, I'm on LinkedIn, Roei Samuel. I've got a newsletter out there called Founder and my own podcast, Big Risk Energy.
Sick, man.